I bought a used car from my daughter-in-law's mother, but the GPS had a saved address named simply, formally, residence. I figured she'd just forgotten to erase it, a digital ghost left behind. But curiosity, I've learned, is a strange and powerful current. It can pull you out of the stagnant waters of your life and into the deep. So I drove there, the road coiled upwards, a gray ribbon thrown against the green velvet of a mountain, leading to a lookout point that seemed to hang on the edge of the world. An old man was waiting for me. He had the stillness of someone who has been waiting for a very, very long time. He looked me in the eyes, and in their depths I saw a story that stretched back decades. He said something that would not just change my life, but utterly dismantle it and rebuild it from the foundations up. But before we get to that moment, to the words that cleaved my life into a before and an after, I need to tell you who I was. Because the woman who went up that mountain was not the same one who came down. My name is Elda. I'm 63 years old. And for the last 5 years, I've been a shadow of myself. A faded photograph of a woman who used to live here. I don't know when I stopped living, not exactly. Maybe it was the day I stood in the cold, damp earth of the cemetery and watched them lower my husband's casket into the ground. Or maybe it was months later, when the casseroles stopped arriving and the phone calls dwindled, and I realized the house stayed silent even when I was screaming on the inside. The truth is, it doesn't matter when the light went out. What matters is that it reached a point where the space between waking up and going to bed was a featureless gray landscape. My life was a loop, a recording playing the same empty notes day after day. The routine was my anchor and my cage. I'd wake up at 6 a.m, always without an alarm. My body, riddled with a quiet anxiety, had forgotten the simple peace of uninterrupted sleep. The first thing I'd do was make coffee, the ritual a phantom limb of a life I used to share. The machine would hiss and sputter, filling the kitchen with an aroma that was once comforting, but now only served to highlight the emptiness of the second mug that remained, cold and clean, on the shelf. I'd drink my single cup in the same worn armchair in the living room, its floral pattern faded from years of sunlight and sitting. I would stare at the same spot on the opposite wall, a small, barely there crack in the plaster that I'd been meaning to fix for years. It felt like a portrait of my own heart. Then came breakfast. A single slice of toast, a smear of butter, eaten standing over the kitchen sink. After that, the television, it was my constant companion, a babbling, faceless friend. I'd turn it on not to watch, but to listen. Game shows with their shrieking contestants, daytime talk shows dissecting the lives of strangers, cooking programs preparing elaborate meals I would never make. The voices of people I didn't know filled the crushing silence I was too afraid to face. The silence was a mirror, and I couldn't bear to look at my own reflection in it for too long. In the afternoons, I'd sometimes force myself to go to the supermarket. It was a pilgrimage of monotony. I'd navigate the familiar aisles, my cart rattling a lonely rhythm on the linoleum floor. I'd buy the same things every time: milk, bread, eggs, a frozen dinner for one. I'd exchange the same pleasantries with the cashier, a young woman with a name tag that said, Brenda. "How are you today, Elda?" She'd ask, her smile practiced. "Fine, dear. Just plugging along," I'd reply, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. I'd return home, unpack the groceries into a mostly empty refrigerator, and the great accomplishment of the day would be over. And just like that, one day would bleed into the next, life slipping through my fingers like fine, gray sand. My children, bless their hearts, called on Sundays. The conversations were a script we had both memorized. "How are you, Mom?" they'd ask, their voices tinged with a dutiful concern that felt miles away. And I always answered the same way. "Fine, honey. Just plugging along." But the truth is, I wasn't plugging along anywhere. I was stuck, frozen in time, a clock whose hands had stopped the day he left. And I just hadn't had the heart to take it down from the wall. Sometimes, in the harsh light of the bathroom, I'd look in the mirror and not recognize the woman looking back at me. Her eyes were tired, sunken into a web of fine lines. Her mouth had forgotten the shape of a true smile. It settled into a permanent, neutral line of resignation. That woman was me, but at the same time, she wasn't. She was what was left of me after so much time of just existing, of breathing in and out without purpose. She was the husk I didn't have any close friends. Oh, I had acquaintances, of course. Faces at church I'd nod to, neighbors I'd wave at from across the street. But there was no one I could call at 3 a.m, my voice thick with unshed tears, and confess that I felt utterly and completely lost. I had stopped cultivating friendships years ago. First, because taking care of my sick husband had consumed every waking moment, every ounce of my energy. It was a full-time job with no breaks and no pay, fueled only by a weary sense of duty and a faded memory of love. Afterward, after he was gone, I simply had no energy left for anyone else. And then, insidiously, I got used to the loneliness. I became an expert in it, so much so that it started to feel more comfortable, more predictable, than the chaotic messiness of company. My daughter-in-law, Marlene, was one of the few people who still tried to breach the walls I'd built around myself. She was a good soul, kinder and more patient than my own son deserved, if I'm being brutally honest. She'd visit me every 2 weeks or so, always with a gentle excuse that didn't demand anything of me. "I was just passing by and thought I'd bring you these cookies," she'd say, holding out a tin. Or, "I had a meeting nearby and just wanted to pop in and see how you were doing." I knew she wasn't just passing by. I knew she carved out time in her busy life to come and sit in my silent house because she was worried about me. And although I never said the words out loud, I thanked her silently for it, for her stubborn, gentle refusal to let me disappear completely. Marlene had that rare ability to be present without invading, to care without judging. It was Marlene who told me about the car. One crisp April afternoon, she came to my house with that look on her face you get when you have something important to say, but don't know how to start. We sat in the living room, the silence between us thick with unspoken things. After a few minutes of strained small talk about the weather and her children, she finally dropped the news, her voice soft with grief. Her mother, Eloise, had passed away 3 weeks ago. Cancer. It had been fast and merciless, as those things usually are. I had barely known Eloise. I'd met her a handful of times at sprawling family gatherings, birthdays, holidays. We'd exchange polite words over plates of turkey and stuffing, but nothing more. She was a quiet, elegant woman, always impeccably dressed, with a deep and profound sadness in her eyes that I never understood the source of. It was a melancholy that seemed to be woven into the very fabric of her being. Marlene told me they were selling her mother's things, the house, the furniture, the car. And that's when she looked at me, her gaze direct. She had thought of me when she saw the car because she knew I needed one. My old clunker had finally given up the ghost 6 months ago, its engine sighing its last on the side of the road. Since then, I'd been dependent on taxis, which were expensive, or asking my kids for rides, which I hated more than anything. I didn't like being a burden. I didn't like needing anyone. It felt like a surrender. Marlene offered me the car at a ridiculously low price, $3,000 for a vehicle that was easily worth $10,000. "It was Mom's car," she said, her voice catching. She loved it. "I want it to go to someone who will take care of it, someone in the family." I accepted without thinking much. I needed a car, and the price was impossible to refuse. But looking back, I think I accepted for another reason. It was simply easier to say yes than to try and explain the vast, complicated emptiness of my life, to explain why I didn't feel I deserved such a kindness, why the idea of going anywhere new felt exhausting. We signed the papers that same week. Marlene handed me the keys with a sad smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Mom took great care of it," she said. "I hope it serves you well." I just nodded. I thanked her and drove home in a car that still smelled faintly of the perfume of a dead woman, a scent of lavender and something else. Something like rain. The first few days, I only used it for the essentials. The well-worn path from my house to the supermarket, to the pharmacy, to church on Sundays. It was a good car, a gray sedan, comfortable and quiet. It drove so smoothly it felt like gliding. It had a built-in GPS, a piece of modern technology my old car had never possessed. At first, I didn't pay any attention to it. I wasn't going anywhere new that required navigation. My world was small, and every road was memorized. But one afternoon, while waiting in the bank's parking lot for it to open after lunch, I started playing with the buttons on the dashboard. It was just bored curiosity, nothing more, a way to pass the time. I turned on the GPS, its screen lighting up with a cheerful glow. I started looking through the functions, the menus, the settings, and that's when I saw it. Under saved locations, there was a single address. Just one. It was named Residence. My first thought was that it must be Eloise's house, that she had simply saved her own address for some reason. Older people do those things. Sometimes we save redundant information just in case our minds fail us. But something about it seemed strange, off-kilter. Why name it Residence and not home or my house? The word sounded so formal, so distant. It sounded like a place you went to, a destination, not a place where you actually lived, where you kicked off your shoes and sighed at the end of a long day. It felt like a secret. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed, the sheets tangled around my legs, thinking about that address. Why was it there? What did it mean? I told myself it was silly, that I was a foolish old woman making a mountain out of a digital molehill. It didn't matter. Eloise had probably saved it years ago for some forgotten errand and never got around to deleting it. But my mind, so long starved of anything to chew on, couldn't let it go. Deep down, I think I needed a mystery. I needed something to break the suffocating monotony of my existence. I needed something to make me feel curious again, to feel that little spark of wanting to know. And that address, so simple and so strange at the same time, was exactly that. It was a question mark dropped into the endless, declarative sentence of my life. The next day, after my ritual of coffee and toast, I found myself sitting at my dusty old desktop computer, looking up the address on the internet. I had scribbled the coordinates from the GPS onto the back of a grocery receipt. I carefully typed them into the search bar of the map website. The location appeared in an instant. A single red pin dropped in the middle of nowhere, on a winding mountain road a full 2 hours from the city. There were no marked buildings nearby, no towns, no clear references. Just a point on the map surrounded by an ocean of green, a scenic overlook maybe, or an abandoned place, a ruin. It made no sense. Why would Eloise, the quiet, elegant woman with sad eyes, have an address like that saved in her car? What was up there that deserved such a specific, formal name? 3 days passed. 3 days in which I couldn't think about anything else. The question of the address became a low hum beneath the surface of my daily routine. I'd find myself staring at the car keys on the hook by the door, imagining myself getting in the car, turning the ignition, and just driving up that mountain, wondering what I would find at the end of the road. I felt ridiculous. A 63-year-old woman, obsessed with an address in a dead woman's GPS. But at the same time, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Something that felt dangerously close to excitement, to anticipation. It was as if there was a secret waiting just for me, and only I had the key to unlock it. On the morning of the 4th day, I woke up before the sun. I made my coffee, but instead of sitting in my usual chair, I stood at the window, watching the sky slowly lighten from charcoal gray to a pale, hopeful blue. I made a decision. I was going to go. What did I have to lose? No one was waiting for me at home. I had no plans to break, no appointments to keep. I had no reason to stay. And maybe, just maybe, that place held an answer to a question I didn't even know I was asking. Or maybe it held nothing at all. But either way, I needed to know. I needed to follow this thread of curiosity to its end. Because if I didn't, I knew I would regret it. And my life was already heavy enough with the weight of unspoken regrets. A list I carried in silence, a burden only I could feel. I left early that morning. Before I could change my mind, before the voice of reason could convince me it was a crazy, foolish thing to do, I dressed in comfortable clothes, jeans and a thick sweater. I filled a water bottle. I grabbed the keys from the hook, their cool metal a solid, reassuring weight in my palm, and I left the house without looking back. The GPS was already on, as if it had been waiting for me. The address, Residence, blinked on the screen like an invitation, or maybe a warning. I wasn't sure which. The first few streets were painfully familiar. I passed by the landmarks of my small life. The bakery where I used to buy bread on Saturdays, the air thick with the smell of yeast and sugar. The park where I used to walk with my husband, our hands linked, our steps in sync. The elementary school where my children studied decades ago, its brick walls echoing with the ghosts of their laughter. But as I got farther from the center of the city, everything started to become unfamiliar. The tightly packed houses gave way to sprawling yards. The concrete buildings dissolved into stands of trees. The familiar hum of the city faded, replaced by the sound of the wind. And suddenly, I was on a highway I had never seen before, heading toward a horizon that was a complete unknown. The GPS guided me with its calm, robotic voice. Continue for 2 miles. Turn right. Stay on this road. I obeyed without question, my hands gripping the wheel, my eyes fixed on the ribbon of asphalt stretching out before me. My mind was in a strange state, a place suspended between fear and exhilarating curiosity. I didn't know what I expected to find. Part of me, the sensible part, thought I would arrive at an empty house, a forgotten ruin with no story to tell. But another part, the part that had kept me awake for 3 nights straight, knew there was something more. There had to be. The road started to climb. The car shifted gears, its engine a low growl as it tackled the incline. The road twisted into sharp curves, each one revealing a new vista of trees so tall they seemed to scrape the sky, their branches forming a dense canopy that blocked out the sun. The air became cooler, cleaner. I rolled down the window and could smell the sharp, clean scent of pine and damp earth. It had been years since I'd left the city like this, years since I'd ventured beyond my small, self-imposed circle of safety. And now here I was, driving up a mountain in pursuit of an address a dead woman had left saved in her GPS. If someone had told me a week ago that I would be doing this, I would have laughed. Or I would have thought I was finally losing my mind. An hour passed, then another. The road became narrower, more solitary. I hadn't seen another car for miles. There were no houses, no signs of life, just the road winding relentlessly through the trees and the sound of the engine filling the profound silence. I started to doubt myself, to wonder if I should turn back. This was madness, but something inside me, a stubborn, newly awakened part of my soul, urged me to keep going. I'd already come this far. Turning back now would feel like a greater failure than continuing on. You have arrived at your destination. The GPS voice startled me out of my thoughts. I looked up and saw that the road ended in a small dirt clearing. There was space to park 3 or 4 cars, but the place was completely empty, save for mine. To one side, a stone path disappeared into the trees, leading toward what looked like an overlook. I could see a weathered wooden railing in the distance, and beyond it, nothing but the vast, open sky. I turned off the engine. The silence that rushed in to fill the void was absolute, so deep it felt like it had weight. I sat in the car for a long moment, my hands still on the wheel, just breathing, trying to calm the sudden storm of nerves that washed over me. What was I doing here? What in God's name did I expect to find? But there was no turning back now. I had driven 2 hours to get to this specific point on the map. I couldn't leave without at least seeing what was there. I opened the door and got out. The cold mountain air hit my face like a splash of water. I wrapped my sweater tighter around myself and walked toward the path. My footsteps crunched on the loose stones, the only sound in the silent world. The wind moved through the high branches of the trees, creating a constant, sibilant whisper. As I got closer to the lookout, the landscape opened up in front of me and I had to stop, my breath catching in my throat. Mountains, range after range of them, stretched as far as the eye could see, their peaks hazy blue in the distance. Deep valleys, carpeted in 1,000 shades of green, plunged below. The sky was so vast, so achingly blue, it made me feel small and utterly insignificant, but it wasn't the breathtaking landscape that stole the air from my lungs. It was the man. He was standing by the railing, an old man. He must have been close to 80. He had his back to me, looking out at the horizon. He wore a worn brown sweater and dark practical pants. His hair was completely white, a soft halo in the afternoon light. And there was something in the way he stood, so still, so patient, so rooted to that spot, that made me think he had been waiting. Waiting for a very long time, I took a step, then another. My feet seemed to move on their own, pulled forward by an invisible string. And when I was just a few feet away, he turned, as if he had sensed my presence without hearing me. Our eyes met, and in that one heart-stopping moment I knew this was not a coincidence. I knew this man knew exactly who I was, or at least he knew why I was there. "You came," he said. His voice was soft, hoarse with age, but it was full of a lifetime of contained emotion. I froze. I couldn't speak. I didn't know what to say, what to do. I just stared at him, my mind racing, trying to understand what was happening. He took a slow step toward me. His eyes, a pale, faded blue, were wet with unshed tears. "I thought no one would," he whispered. "I thought the message would be lost. But you came. I don't understand," I finally managed to say. My voice sounded small and shaky, a stranger's voice. "Who are you? Why are you here? What message?" The old man smiled, a sad, achingly gentle smile that seemed to carry the weight of decades of pain. "The car you're driving," he said, his eyes flicking toward the gray sedan parked in the clearing. "It belonged to Eloise." I nodded slowly, my heart beginning to pound a frantic rhythm against my ribs. "Yes, it was my daughter-in-law's mother's. She passed away. About a month ago." He closed his eyes for a moment, and a tremor of pain passed over his face, as if my words had been a physical blow. "I know," he murmured. "I knew the moment she stopped coming." My mind was a whirlwind, trying to connect the dots, trying to make sense of this impossible encounter. "You knew her," I said. It wasn't a question. It was a statement of fact. He nodded, opening his eyes again. "I knew her my whole life, since we were children, and I loved her every single day of those years, even when she wasn't here, even when I thought I would never see her again." There was something in the way he said it, a simple, profound truth that broke my heart. I could feel the immense weight of those words, the unbearable pain of a whole life spent waiting, spent loving in silence. Why did she leave the address in the GPS? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. The old man turned his gaze back toward the horizon, toward the endless expanse of mountains. "Because Eloise knew," he said, his voice thick with memory. "She knew someone would find it. Someone curious. Someone who couldn't leave a mystery unsolved. She told me once that if anything happened to her, she would leave a clue, a trail, so that I would know she never forgot me, so that someone would come and tell me she was thinking of me, right until the very end." I felt a lump form in my throat, hot and tight. I didn't know this man. I didn't know his story, but I could feel the sheer enormity of what I was hearing. This man had been waiting here, week after week, year after year, waiting for a sign, for someone to follow the breadcrumb trail Eloise had left behind. And I, a lonely old woman with nothing better to do, had been that person. I had followed my idle curiosity to this remote place. And now I was standing in the presence of a love that had survived decades of separation. A love that had outlasted life itself. "What's your name?" I asked softly. He looked at me with those tired but vibrant eyes, eyes that had seen too much and yet still held a spark of light. "Moses," he said. "My name is Moses, and you must be someone special to have followed that path. Not many people would have." I shook my head, a small, involuntary movement. "I'm not special. I'm just a bored old woman who had nothing better to do." He smiled again, a genuine smile this time that briefly erased some of the sorrow from his face. That's what we all say when we do something brave. But the truth is, coming here took courage, more than you think. We stood in silence for a moment, the two of us looking out at the horizon. Two complete strangers, united by the last wish of a woman who was gone. I didn't know what to say. I didn't know how to process all of this. But I felt something changing inside me, a seismic shift in my own barren landscape. Something that had been dormant for years was starting to stir, to wake up, and it had all started with a simple address and a GPS, with a mystery I couldn't ignore, with a curiosity that had brought me here, to this man, to this story. "Tell me," I said, my voice stronger now. "I want to know. I want to know who Eloise was to you. I want to understand why this place was so important." Moses took a deep, shuddering breath, and with a voice that trembled, caught between the beauty of memory and the bitterness of pain, he began to speak. And I, a woman who had stopped listening to stories years ago, stood there and listened to every word, feeling every emotion, living every moment of a love that never died. "I met Eloise when we were 8 years old," Moses began, his voice softening as if he were unwrapping a fragile, precious memory. "We were neighbors. Our houses were right next to each other, separated only by a rickety fence, in a small town 2 hours from here. She was the most beautiful girl I had ever seen. She had long, dark hair, always in a braid that hung down her back. And those eyes? God, those eyes. They were the color of moss after a rain, and they could see right into your soul. He paused, lost for a moment in a vision only he could see. I said nothing. I just waited, the wind moving his white hair, the vastness of the mountains, a silent witness to his confession. We were inseparable, he continued. We played together every day, from sunrise to sunset. We explored the woods behind our houses. We built forts. We shared secrets. We grew up together. And when we turned 16, I knew I loved her. Not in the simple way a child loves a friend, but in the way a man loves a woman. Completely. Without reservations, without doubts. It was the most certain thing in my life. And her? I asked softly. Did she love you? Moses nodded, and a smile bloomed on his face, a smile that was pure pain and pure joy all at once. Yes, she told me. Right here, in this exact spot. We were 17. I brought her here on my old sputtering motorcycle. We rode up the mountain at sunset, the air growing colder, the sky turning pink and gold. And when we reached this lookout, she took my hand, her fingers small and warm in mine, and she told me she wanted to spend the rest of her life with me. She said that no matter what happened, it would always be us. What happened then? I asked, though I could already feel the ache of a tragic answer. Moses's jaw clenched, the smile vanishing. Our families happened. My family was poor, very poor. I worked in the fields with my father from the time I was a boy. We barely had enough to eat some winters. Eloise's family was different. Her father owned land, a lot of it. They had money. They had a name in the town. And when we got engaged, in secret, of course, when I gave her a small ring I'd saved for months to buy, everything fell apart. He stepped away from the railing and walked a few steps, pacing as if the memory was a physical thing he needed to move away from. I followed him silently. Her father found out, he continued, his voice hardening. I still don't know how, but he knew. And he came to my house one night, his fancy car kicking up dust in our yard. He told my father that if I kept seeing Eloise, he would take away the small plot of land we rented from him. He would see to it that no one in the county would hire us. He would leave us on the street. My father begged me to leave her. He cried. He told me I couldn't ruin our whole family for a youthful romance, that there would be other women, that in time I would forget. But you didn't forget her, I said, stating the obvious. Moses laughed, a short, humorless sound. How could I forget my own soul? I tried. For my family, I tried. I stopped looking for her. I avoided the places in town where I knew she'd be. The pain was a physical thing, an ache in my chest that never went away. And she was suffering too. I found out later from a friend that she cried every night, that she stopped eating, that her father had to take her to the doctor because she was making herself sick with sadness. 3 months later, Eloise came looking for me. She found me working in the fields, my hands raw from the labor. She told me she couldn't take it anymore, that she would die if we weren't together. And God forgive me, I was weak. I loved her too much to let her go. So we started seeing each other in secret, here, in this place. This lookout was our refuge, our separate world where her father and my poverty didn't exist. We'd come up the mountain whenever we could, sometimes just for an hour stolen from our real lives. Sometimes we'd stay until dawn, watching the stars fade. And up here we were free. It was just us. How long did that last? I asked, my heart aching for those 2 young lovers. Moses looked at the sky, as if the answer were written in the clouds. 2 years, 2 stolen years, 2 years of lies and hiding and constant gnawing fear. But they were also the 2 happiest years of my life, because I had her. Even if it was in secret, even if it was only in this place, I had her, and that was enough. But it didn't last forever, I said quietly. He shook his head, his gaze dropping to the ground. No, one afternoon Eloise's brother followed us. He found us here. He told his father, and this time her father didn't come to threaten me. He just took Eloise away. He sent her to live with an aunt and uncle in a city 3 states over. He took her away from me overnight. No goodbyes, No explanations. One day she was here, her laughter echoing in these trees, and the next she was just gone. I felt my own heart squeeze in sympathy. You couldn't contact her? Moses wiped his eyes with the back of his rough hand. I tried, Lord, I tried. I wrote letters, dozens of them. They were all returned, stamped unopened. I saved enough money for a bus ticket and went to the city where she was. Her uncle, a big, mean man, chased me off their property with a rifle. They told me if I ever came near her again, they'd have me put in jail, that they'd make something up if they had to, that I was nothing and I had to forget her and move on with my life. But you kept coming here, I said, looking around the empty lookout, which now felt sacred, haunted. Moses nodded. Every week, for 40 years, every single Sunday. At first, I came because I hoped she would come back. I thought she was strong, that she'd find a way to escape, to return to me. But months passed and then years, and she never came back. I found out through the grapevine that she had gotten married, that she had children, that she had built a life without me. Did you ever marry? I asked, though I already knew the answer. He shook his head slowly. I couldn't. I tried. I really did. I tried to date other women. My family pressured me. My friends told me I was a fool, that I was wasting my life waiting for a ghost. And they were right. I was a fool, but I couldn't help it. Every time I tried to kiss another woman, I saw Eloise's face. Every time I tried to love someone else, my heart reminded me that it already belonged to someone. So I stopped trying. It kept coming here, I said. The scale of his devotion, his love, almost impossible to comprehend. Moses smiled sadly. Yes, it changed over the years. It went from a vigil of hope to a ritual of remembrance. I no longer came expecting to see her. I came because this was the only place in the world I could still feel her close to me. The memories here are so strong, so vivid, that I could almost hear her laugh on the wind. I could almost feel her hand in mine. This place became my church, my confession, my refuge. We fell silent. I didn't know what to say in the face of so much pain, of an entire life dedicated to an impossible, unwavering love. Moses walked back to the railing and looked out over the valley. 6 months ago, he said, his voice dropping to a near whisper. Something extraordinary happened. I was here on a Sunday morning, as always, and I heard a car coming up the road. I didn't think anything of it. Sometimes hikers or tourists come by, but when the car parked and the door opened, I saw her. It was her, Elda. It was Eloise. After 40 years, she was standing right there looking at me. And I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. She came back, I whispered, tears welling in my own eyes. Moses nodded, the tears now streaming freely down his weathered cheeks. She walked toward me. She wasn't the 17-year-old girl I had loved. She was an older woman with gray in her hair and wrinkles around her eyes. But her eyes were still the same. And when she spoke my name, it was as if not a single day had passed. Moses, she said, forgive me for taking so long. Forgive me for not being braver. I hugged her. I hugged her like I had dreamed of doing for 40 years. And we cried. We both cried like children. All the unsaid words, all the lives we didn't get to live together, all the lost time, it all came out in that one embrace. She told me she never stopped loving me, he went on, that she thought of me every day of her life, that her marriage had been arranged by her father, that she had been a good wife and a good mother, but her heart had never belonged to her husband. It was always mine. It had always been kept safe here, on this mountain. Why did she come back, after so much time? I asked. Moses took a deep, shaky breath. Because she was sick. Cancer. The doctors had given her 6 months. And she decided she couldn't die without seeing me one last time, without telling me she always loved me, without saying goodbye in this place where it all began. We came here every week after that, Moses continued, his voice breaking. Every Sunday, just like we used to when we were young. She would drive from the city in that gray sedan, and I would drive up in my old truck, and we would meet here, in our place. We talked for hours about everything we had lived through separately, about the children she had, who she loved so dearly, about the different jobs I had held over the years, about the dreams that never came true, about the life that should have been ours. He sat down on the ground near the railing, his legs seeming to give way. I followed his lead, sitting beside him on the cool earth. The wind blew softly, and the sun began its slow descent toward the horizon, painting the sky in strokes of orange and purple. "We didn't have much time," Moses said. We knew it. Every week that passed, she was a little weaker, a little paler. The cancer was consuming her from the inside out, but she never missed a Sunday, not one. Even when she could barely walk, even when the pain was terrible, she came. Because these moments were all we had left. I asked her if she regretted it, her life, marrying another man, not fighting harder for us. She looked at me with those tired, beautiful eyes, and she told me no. That she had loved her children fiercely, that she had found purpose in being a mother, but that if she could go back, if she could choose again, she would have chosen me without a moment's hesitation. And that, in some strange way, that gave me peace, knowing I wasn't the only one who had carried this love all these years. The last time we saw each other was 2 months ago, Moses continued, his voice barely audible now. She was very sick. She could barely breathe. I told her not to come anymore, to stay home and rest. But she insisted. She told me she needed to see me one last time, that she needed to say goodbye here. So she came. Her daughter Marlene drove her. She helped her get out of the car, and then she left us alone for an hour. Marlene knew? I asked, surprised. Moses nodded. Eloise had told her everything. The whole story. Told her I had been the love of her life. Marlene cried when she found out. She cried for her mother, for me, for all the time we lost. But she understood, and she was generous enough to give us that last moment together. We sat right here, Moses said, patting the ground where we now sat. Eloise rested her head on my shoulder. I held her, and we stayed like that in silence, watching the sunset. We didn't need words. We had talked enough during those 6 months. We had said everything there was to say. We just wanted to be together, to feel each other's presence one last time, to memorize that moment, because we both knew it would be the last. When the sun had completely set, she lifted her head. She looked me in the eyes, and she told me something I will never forget. "Moses," she said, "I am leaving now. But I want you to know that these last few months with you were the greatest gift of my life. You gave me more love in 6 months than I received in 40 years. And even though we couldn't have the life we dreamed of, we had this. We had this place. We had these moments, and that is enough." I told her I loved her, that I would love her until my last breath, that when I died, my soul would come looking for hers, and we would finally be together, and no one could ever separate us again. She smiled, that sad, beautiful smile she always had, and she gave me a kiss, a long, deep kiss that tasted like goodbye and forever, all at the same time. Then she told me something strange. She said she had left a clue, a sign, that someone would come eventually, someone who would find the address saved in her GPS, and that person would bring me a message. I didn't understand at the time. I thought it was the pain talking, the medication confusing her. But I played along. I told her I would wait, that I would be here every Sunday, as always, waiting. Marlene came back for her, helped her walk slowly to the car. Eloise turned around one last time. She looked at me, and she raised her hand in farewell. I raised mine too, and that's how we said goodbye. No screaming, no drama. Just 2 old people who had loved each other their whole lives, finally letting go. She died 3 weeks later, Moses finished, wiping his tears with the sleeve of his sweater. I didn't go to the funeral. I wasn't invited, and I wouldn't have gone even if I had been. I didn't want to see her in a casket. I preferred to remember her here, alive, smiling, with her head on my shoulder, watching the sunset. But I kept coming, every Sunday, because I had promised her I would be here, and because somehow I felt she was still visiting me, that her spirit was in this place, in the wind, in the trees, in the silence. He finally turned to look at me, his gaze direct and piercing. And then today, when I saw that gray car coming up the road, the car I knew so well, I knew it was the sign. I knew you were the person Eloise had mentioned. You came. I don't know who you are. I don't know why you decided to follow that address. But you came, and that means Eloise kept her promise. She left a trail so someone would find me, so someone would tell me she thought of me until the end. So I would know I wasn't crazy for waiting here all these years, that what we felt was real, that our love mattered. I felt my own tears running down my cheeks. hot against my cool skin. I didn't know what to say. The story of Moses and Eloise was devastatingly beautiful, a tapestry of love and loss woven over a lifetime. And I, without knowing it, had been the final thread. I had been the messenger. I had followed my curiosity to this place and stumbled upon a love that had survived decades of separation, a love that neither distance nor time nor even death could destroy. She loved you, I said finally, my voice barely a whisper. She loved you until the end, and she wanted you to know. Moses nodded, a profound sense of peace settling over his features. For the first time since I'd met him, the deep lines of sorrow around his eyes seemed to soften. "Thank you," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Thank you for coming. Thank you for listening. Thank you for letting me tell this story. I've carried it alone for so long that sometimes I thought I would go crazy." We sat there as the sky deepened to indigo and the first stars began to prick the darkness. Two strangers who were strangers no longer, united by the final loving act of a woman who had loved with her entire being. I thought about my own life, my own profound loneliness, the 5 gray years I had wasted just existing, and I realized, with a jolt that went right through me, that Eloise hadn't just left a message for Moses. She had left one for me, too. She had shown me that a love like that exists, that it's worth taking risks for, that it's worth feeling everything for, that a life without that kind of feeling isn't really living, and that it's never, ever too late. Eloise had been 62 when she went back to find Moses. 62 years old, and with only months to live. But she did it. She had the courage to follow her heart one last time, and those 6 months were enough. They were everything, Moses, I said softly. He looked at me, his eyes questioning in the twilight. "Thank you for sharing your story with me. You've taught me something I had forgotten. Something I think I buried along with my husband. You've reminded me that I'm still alive, that I can still feel, that I can still choose to truly live instead of just existing." He smiled, a slow, knowing smile. "Then Eloise left a message for you too. Not just for me, for you." That night, I drove back home in a state of complete silence. I didn't turn on the radio. I didn't want any noise, any distraction, to interrupt the thoughts and emotions swirling inside me. The story of Moses and Eloise had stirred something deep in my soul, a part of me I thought had died and turned to dust. I got home after midnight. I went inside, locked the door, and for the first time in 5 years, the familiar loneliness didn't feel comfortable. It felt wrong. It felt like a choice I had been making day after day without even realizing it, a prison of my own making. I couldn't sleep that night. I stayed awake, staring at the shadows on the ceiling, thinking about Eloise, about how she had lived for 40 years with a great secret love hidden in her heart. How she had been a good wife and a good mother, but never truly whole. And I thought about Moses, how he had waited his entire life, how he had chosen loneliness rather than love anyone who wasn't her. And I wondered which was worse, living a life that was only halfway true, like Eloise, or not living at all, like Moses. But then I thought about those last 6 months they had together. How Eloise had found the courage to go back, to find him, to tell him the truth before it was too late. And I realized that had been her redemption, her way of closing the circle. She had been brave, far braver than I had been in years. The next morning, I woke up different. I couldn't explain exactly what had changed, but something fundamental inside me had shifted. I made coffee as usual, but instead of slumping into my chair and staring at the wall, I took my mug and went out to the back patio. I hadn't done that in months, maybe years. The garden was neglected, the flower beds choked with weeds, the plants half dead from thirst. But the sun was shining, a pair of robins were singing their hearts out in the old oak tree, and the cool morning air filled my lungs in a way that made me feel powerfully, shockingly alive. I spent the entire day in the garden, cleaning. I pulled weeds until my back ached and my hands were raw and caked with soil. I watered the plants that could still be saved. I trimmed the overgrown bushes. It was hard, physical work, but it felt good. I felt useful. I felt present in my own body, in my own life. When I finally finished, I sat on the back step, exhausted and filthy, and looked at my work. It wasn't much, just a half-rescued garden, but it was something. It was a start. The following Sunday, I did something I hadn't planned. I took the car keys and I drove back to the mountain. I don't know why I did it. Maybe I felt the story wasn't over. Or maybe I just wanted to see Moses again, to make sure he was real, that he was okay. When I got to the lookout, he was there, in the same spot, as if he had never moved. "You came back," he said when he saw me. He didn't seem surprised, just pleased. I walked over to him and stood by his side at the railing. "Yes," I said. "I came back." I wasn't sure why, but I felt I should. Moses nodded, his gaze fixed on the horizon. Sometimes places call to us, or people, or stories that haven't finished being told. We stood in silence for a while. It was a comfortable silence, the kind you can share with someone without feeling the need to fill it with meaningless words. Finally, I asked him if he came every Sunday. He said yes, that he had come every Sunday for 40 years, and he wasn't going to stop now. "This is my place," he said. "My sanctuary. The only piece of earth where I feel at peace. Can I come with you?" I asked. The words came out before I could think about them, propelled by some new, impulsive part of myself. The moment I said them, I knew they were right. Moses looked at me, surprised. "You'd like to do that?" I nodded. "I think so. I think this place is good for me, too. It reminds me that there's more to life than just passing the days. It reminds me I can still feel something." Moses smiled, a warm, genuine smile. "Then come. Come every Sunday if you want. I could use the company. I've been alone up here for a very long time. It would be nice to share this place with someone." And so it began. Every Sunday, I would drive the 2 hours to the lookout. Moses would already be there waiting for me. At first, we just sat in a comfortable silence, looking at the scenery, breathing the clean mountain air. But slowly we started to talk. He told me more about his life, about the various jobs he'd had, farmhand, mechanic, carpenter, the things he'd seen, the places he'd traveled in a futile attempt to forget Eloise, but never succeeding. He told me about his family, about his parents who died without ever understanding why their son never married, about his siblings who eventually stopped insisting. He told me he lived alone in a small, simple house near the town where he'd grown up. His life was quiet, solitary, but he told me it wasn't unhappy, just incomplete. I started to open up too. I told him about my husband, about how I had loved him, but not in the all-consuming, passionate way he had loved Eloise. My marriage had been good, stable, comfortable, but it never had that spark, that fire. I told him I sometimes felt guilty about that, for not having loved enough, for having let my husband die without ever knowing that my heart had always been a little bit asleep. Moses listened without judging. "Not all loves are like mine and Eloise's," he said one afternoon. "And that doesn't make them any less valid. Love comes in many forms, Elda. The fact that you were there for your husband, that you took care of him, that you gave him a peaceful life, that is also love. A profound love. We don't all need the storm. Sometimes the calm harbor is enough." His words gave me a piece of peace I didn't know I needed. I had carried that guilt for years, that feeling of not having been enough, of not having felt enough. But Moses was right. I had loved in my own way, and that was okay. The weeks turned into months. Sundays became the anchor of my week, the day I looked forward to most. They weren't just another empty day anymore. They were the day I felt alive again. I started to notice changes in myself. Small things at first. I started dressing up more, not just on Sundays, but every day. I'd put on clothes I actually liked, instead of the first gray, shapeless thing I found. I'd fix my hair. I'd put on a little lipstick, not out of vanity, but because I was starting to care again. I was starting to care about myself. I also started going out more. I'd go to the farmer's market on Saturdays. I'd walk in the park and actually look at the people, the children playing, the couples holding hands. I accepted an invitation from a neighbor for coffee, something I had refused dozens of times before. And I discovered it wasn't so terrible. That talking to someone, laughing, sharing stories, it was nice. It was necessary. My children noticed the change. My son called me one Tuesday night. "Mom," he said, his voice hesitant, "you sound different. Happier." I told him I was fine, that I had started going out more, that I had met a friend. I didn't tell him who Moses was. I didn't tell him the story, not yet. That was something private, something sacred, something I wasn't ready to share. But I told him I felt better, that I was finally starting to live again. And it was true. After 5 years of just existing, I was finally truly living. And it had all started with an address in a GPS, with a mystery I couldn't ignore, with a love story that taught me it's never too late to feel. 3 months had passed since that first Sunday at the Lookout. 3 months of increasingly deep conversations. 3 months of shared silences that said more than 1,000 words. 3 months in which Moses and I became something more than two strangers united by someone else's story. We became friends, confidants, companions in the midst of two lonelinesses that had lasted far too long. One Sunday, I arrived at the Lookout, and Moses wasn't in his usual spot by the railing. My heart gave a little lurch of fear. I found him sitting on a large rock by the side of the path. He looked tired, older than usual. I approached, worried. "Are you okay?" I asked. He looked up and smiled, but the smile didn't reach his eyes. "I'm fine, Elda, just a little tired. The years weigh more heavily on some days than others." I sat down next to him. For the first time, I noticed how much he had aged in the short time I'd known him. The deep wrinkles around his eyes, the slight tremor in his hands, the way he breathed as if it were a conscious effort. This man had waited his whole life, and now that he had finally had his closure with Eloise, it was as if his body had decided it could finally rest. "You know," Moses said after a long silence, "when Eloise died, I thought I would go soon too. I thought that without her, without the hope of seeing her again, I would have no reason to go on. But then you came, and I realized that maybe there was another reason. Maybe Eloise sent you not just to give me her message, but to teach me that life goes on, that there is still beauty in being alive, even at our age, even after everything." His words touched me deeply. I had thought the same thing, that after my husband, there was nothing left for me. But these 3 months had shown me the opposite. They had taught me that there is always room for new stories, for new connections, for new beginnings. Moses looked at me with an intensity I hadn't seen before. "Elda," he said, his voice low. "Can I confess something to you?" I nodded. "Of course, anything." He took a deep breath. "I have enjoyed these Sundays more than I can possibly express. When you arrive, this place, it feels different. It's no longer just the sanctuary of a lost love. It's also a place of hope, of the present, of life. And I've realized that I look forward to Sundays not just out of habit, but because I know you will be here." I felt something move in my chest, a warm, fluttering sensation I hadn't felt in years, maybe ever. It was different from what I had felt for my husband. That had been the comfortable warmth of a familiar fire. This was something else, a spark, more intense, more present, more real. "I look forward to Sundays too," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "In fact, they're the only thing I look forward to all week. The rest of the days are just time passing until I can come back here, until I can see you again." We looked at each other for a long moment, and in that charged silence, I understood something that both scared and excited me at the same time. I was falling in love. At 63 years old, with a man who was almost 80, a man who had loved another woman with his entire being, his whole life, a man who could probably never love me the way he had loved Eloise. But still, even knowing all that, my heart, my stubborn, sleeping heart, had decided to feel again. I didn't say anything that day. I was afraid of ruining the precious thing we had, afraid he wouldn't feel the same, afraid of being a ridiculous old woman, in love like a teenager. But the feeling didn't go away. It grew stronger with every passing Sunday, with every conversation, with every time our hands brushed by accident, and I felt a jolt of electricity run through my skin. A month later, Moses arrived at the Lookout with a small carved wooden box in his hands. He sat next to me and handed it to me. "This was Eloise's," he said. "She gave it to me the last time we saw each other. She told me to keep it until I felt the time was right. And I think that time is now." I opened the box with trembling hands. Inside was a carefully folded letter. The paper was old and soft, the ink a bit faded, but the handwriting was clear and elegant. The handwriting of a woman who knew she was writing her last words. Moses nodded. "Read it." She said it was for you too. I unfolded the letter and began to read. "My dearest Moses, if you are reading this, it means I am gone. And it also means that someone followed the clue I left. Someone curious, someone brave, someone who needed to find you as much as you needed to be found. I don't know who this person will be, but I know they will come. Because the universe is generous with lonely hearts when they are finally ready to open. I want you to know that these last few months with you were the greatest gift of my life. You gave me peace. You gave me closure. You gave me the chance to love you openly one last time. And although I am leaving, I leave happy. Because I know I loved you well, and because I know you loved me better. But now, I need you to promise me something. I need you to live, truly live, not just exist, waiting for me at that lookout. I need you to open your heart to the possibility of being happy again. You don't have to love me less to love someone else. The heart doesn't work that way. Love isn't used up. It multiplies. And you, my love, have so much love to give that it would be a crime for it to die unshared. To the person reading this with Moses, thank you. Thank you for following your curiosity. Thank you for listening to his story. Thank you for giving him your company. I know you didn't know me, and I know this must seem strange, but I trust that the universe put you in his path for a reason. Maybe he needed your friendship, or maybe you needed his story, or maybe, just maybe, you need each other in ways you don't yet understand. Don't be afraid to feel. Don't be afraid to live. I wasted 40 years being a coward. 40 years where I could have fought harder, where I could have been braver. Don't make my mistake. If there's something you want to say it. If there's something you want to do it. Because time is cruel and unforgiving, and regrets weigh more than any mistake. With all my love, always, Eloise. Tears were streaming down my face when I finished reading. I looked at Moses and saw he was crying too. We stayed like that for a long time. Two broken people, two lonely people who had found an unexpected comfort in each other's pain. And now we had the blessing of a dead woman to dare to feel something more. Elda, Moses said, his voice hoarse. There's something I need to tell you. I shook my head, putting a finger to his lips. No, let me speak first, because if I don't say it now, I never will. And Eloise is right. I don't want any more regrets. I took his hand, the old wrinkled hand of a man who had waited a lifetime. Moses, I'm falling in love with you. I have fallen in love with you, he corrected me, his voice soft but sure. Not in the way I loved Eloise. That was fire, passion, a storm. This is different. It's softer, calmer, a safe harbor. But it is no less real, no less important. He squeezed my hand. I thought I could never love anyone else after her. I thought my heart was buried with her. But you proved me wrong. You taught me that the heart can love more than once, in different ways. That it's not a betrayal. That it's just life. Life, following its natural course. He moved closer to me. And there, in the same sacred place where Eloise and Moses had loved 40 years earlier, he kissed me. It wasn't a desperate kiss, not overflowing with youthful passion. It was tenderness. It was understanding. It was two tired souls finding refuge in one another. It was perfect. When we pulled apart, we were both smiling, shy, hesitant smiles, like teenagers experiencing their first love. Because in a way, that's exactly what we were. Two old people, living something entirely new, something they had never experienced in this way, something that was worth every year of waiting, every year of loneliness, every year of pain. What do we do now? I asked, my heart full to bursting. Moses looked out at the horizon he had stared at for 40 years, waiting for something that had finally, in the most unexpected way, arrived. We live, he said simply. We live whatever time we have left. Without fear, without guilt. We just live, and that's exactly what we did. The following months were like a dream I never wanted to wake up from. Moses and I continued to see each other every Sunday at the lookout. But now we also saw each other during the week. He would come down from his small house in the country, and we would spend the afternoons together. We'd have coffee on my newly revived patio. We'd walk in the park, hand in hand. We'd go to the movies like two kids on their first date. And every moment felt precious. Every shared laugh, a jewel stolen from the time we had wasted being alone. The first time Moses came to my house, he stood in the doorway, looking at everything with a gentle curiosity. It's a cozy place, he said. It feels like you. Warm, calm, full of hidden life, just waiting to come out. I made coffee, and we sat in my living room in the chairs where I had spent so many empty hours. But now they weren't empty. We talked for hours about our past lives, our fears, our quiet hopes for whatever time we had left. I started introducing him to my neighbors, at first with a bit of embarrassment. I didn't know how to explain who he was. My boyfriend sounded ridiculous at our age. My friend sounded too casual for the depth of what we felt. In the end, I would just say, "This is Moses," and I let them draw their own conclusions. Most of them just smiled, a knowing, happy look in their eyes. One afternoon, Marlene came to visit unannounced. She knocked on the door just as Moses and I were on the patio. I opened it, and her face showed her surprise at seeing an unknown man in my house. "Marlene," I said, "there's someone I want you to meet." We went out to the patio. Moses stood up, and when Marlene saw him, her face went through a cascade of emotions, confusion, then dawning recognition, then tears. "You're Moses," she said, her voice breaking. "My mother's Moses," he nodded, his own eyes wet. "I am, and you must be Marlene. Your mother spoke so much about you. She told me what a good daughter you were, how you took care of her until the end." Marlene put her hands to her mouth. "I can't believe this. You're together, my mother. She would have wanted this. She planned this." The three of us sat down, and I told her the whole story. When I finished, she got up and hugged Moses tightly. "Thank you," she said. "Thank you for making my mother so happy in her final months. And thank you for letting Elda be a part of this. My mother would have been so happy to know you both found each other, that her story had this ending." Moses was crying too. "Your mother was the love of my life," he said. "But Elda is my second chance, and I'm going to honor them both by loving her well." After that day, Marlene became our biggest ally. She invited us to dinner with her and my son. At first, my son was confused, a little uncomfortable. "Mom," he told me in private later, "are you sure about this? Are you happy?" I looked him straight in the eye. "Happier than I have been in years, honey. Moses makes me feel alive again." My son took a deep breath. "Then I'm happy for you, Mom. You deserve to be happy." Those words meant more to me than he could possibly imagine. I didn't need his permission, but I needed to know he understood. One evening, as we watched the sunset from our favorite spot at the lookout, Moses took my hand. "Elda," he said, "I want you to move in with me. Or I'll move in with you. I don't want to waste any more time. I want to wake up next to you every morning." My heart leaped. It was a terrifying proposal, but it was also the most exciting thing I had ever heard. "Yes," I said without a moment's hesitation. "Yes, I do." We decided he would move into my house. He didn't have many things, a few boxes of clothes, some books, and one special box that held all the unopened letters Eloise had written him when they were young. He asked if it bothered me that he kept them. "It doesn't bother me," I said honestly. "Eloise is part of your story. I'm not competing with her memory. I'm grateful to her. Her love brought me here. It brought me to you." The first night Moses slept in my house was strange and wonderful. We got into bed, and in the quiet darkness he simply took my hand. And we fell asleep just like that, holding hands like two children afraid of the dark. And it was perfect. I woke up in the middle of the night and watched him sleep, his breathing steady, his face relaxed in a way I'd never seen before. And I felt a gratitude so deep it almost hurt. Living together was easier than I imagined. We fell into a comfortable rhythm, but not everything was perfect. 2 months after he moved in, Moses developed a cough. At first, I didn't think much of it, but it didn't get better. It got worse. One night, I heard him struggling to breathe. The next morning, I forced him to go to the doctor. The 2 weeks we waited for the test results were an agony of silent fear. When the results finally came, the doctor gave us the news with a gentleness that only made it hurt more. Lung cancer. Advanced. Aggressive. Treatment could buy him a few more months, maybe a year, but it would be brutal. We left the office in silence. In the car, Moses finally spoke. "I'm not going to do the treatment," he said, his voice firm. "I'm not going to spend my last months feeling sick and weak. I want to live, really live, whatever time I have left, with you." I wanted to argue, to convince him to fight. But when I looked in his eyes, I understood. He had waited his whole life for happiness. He wasn't going to waste his last months in hospitals. "Okay," I said, taking his hand. "We'll do it your way. We will live every single day as if it's a gift, because it is." The next few months were the most intense, the most beautiful of my life. We went to the beach. We visited small towns we'd never seen. We ate ice cream in the park. We lived. Every Sunday we still went up to the lookout. Even when he could barely walk, he insisted. "This place is sacred," he'd say. "This is where I loved Eloise. This is where I met you. This is where my life made sense." The last Sunday he was able to go, sitting in our spot, he told me something I'll never forget. "Elda," he said, "I want you to know that these last few months have been the happiest of my life. Yes, I loved Eloise with all my soul, but what I have with you, this is different. It's real, it's present, it's complete, and I wouldn't trade a single day of it for anything in the world." Soon, he couldn't get out of bed. I cared for him, lying beside him at night, holding his hand, whispering our memories to him. One night he squeezed my hand weakly. "Elda," he murmured. "My Elda, see you soon." He fell asleep with his hand in mine, and sometime in the early hours of the morning, his breathing simply stopped. I lay there next to him until the sun came up, crying, thanking him, saying goodbye. And when I finally got up, I knew I was changed forever. I would never go back to being that empty woman, because Moses had taught me that living is worth it, always. After the small funeral, Marlene gave me a letter from him. His last words to me were a request. "Keep living, Elda, not for me, for you. Because you deserve every day of happiness you can find. And because now you know how, I love you always." The first few months were dark, but the pain was different this time. It was a sharp, clean pain, a testament to a love that had been real and profound. And in a strange way, that was a comfort. 6 months after his death, I drove back to the lookout. I stood in our spot, feeling the wind on my face. "Hello, Moses," I said out loud. "Hello, Eloise. Thank you for everything." Tears ran down my face, but I was smiling. I knew that wherever they were together. I took a notebook out of my bag. I had started writing our story, the story of how an address and a GPS led me to love, to myself, to the life I was supposed to be living all along. Today, I am 65 years old. It's been 2 years since I bought that car. I am no longer the empty woman who just existed. Now I live fully. I have friends. I paint, I travel, I am alive. I still go up to the lookout every Sunday. It's my ritual, my way of honoring them, my way of reminding myself to keep living. And if I could give one piece of advice to anyone who feels lost, it would be this: follow your curiosity. Dare to feel, because you never know where a simple address saved in a GPS might lead you. You never know when life is going to give you a second chance. And when that chance comes, take it. Don't be afraid. Live completely, live with no regrets. Because in the end, that is all that matters. It's never too late. Remember that. It is never too late.